Alrighty, we're in 1 Samuel chapter 30. I got past one of my favorite Halloween passages there with the witch of Endor. And there's that movie David, that's one of the great scenes. I always like to show that to kids around Halloween time and say, this is why you don't dress up as witches. You know, you don't want to take those lightly, do you?
Yeah, no, you don't. And that's why so many people are turned off by, more and more, I think, as the church begins to separate itself from the Word. I hear more and more people saying, you know, this Halloween thing is a problem.
You had mentioned, do you want to, now I know you will on Sunday,
Yeah.
this kind of odd deal with the...
Yeah, I don't know if you saw...
The Sikh lady.
Yeah, I don't know if you saw this Sikh prayer that was done at the RNC. Which
Republican National Convention.
Yeah, which was very problematic. You have a lot of people talking about God, and invite this lady up because she had something to say about voting and our culture and some of these things. But then they say this prayer. She says she's praying to the one true God, and then when you go through the language and you go to the prayer, the Sikh prayer, it is cultic and it is problematic. And I'm not sure that God, in fact, I know God doesn't honor anybody who invites that up on their stage. So I know that people are trying, what's happening with the RNC is that they're trying to unite, and that's a good thing, but when you do that, you need to be careful about exactly how you're doing it, because you need to unite Republicans, unite, Americans. But in doing that, if you try to unite spiritually, you are asking for a problem.
They seem to be dropping some of the family type elements off of the platform.
Yeah, right. So anyway, some of that stuff going on. We're concerned. I will say this, that I saw a change in how Trump was coming across in some of his, I still call them tweets. And his demeanor, especially on Monday night. I pray that the Lord has his attention in a real way. We'll see. We'll see how this goes. So.
The demons of this world, the gods of this world, are not interested in helping you. They're only interested in bringing people into bondage and darkness and disaster.
Yeah.
So,
and they will use sentiment, the idea of uniting, the idea of peace. They will use that sentiment. Satan will use that sentiment, and God doesn't like it. So, Zechariah chapter 5.
There's no peace without the Prince of Peace, and that is Jesus.
Yeah, that's
alone.
right. That's right.
Jesus
All right.
alone.
Here in chapter 30 of Samuel. Now again, I'm in this mode here, especially now as we continue to go through the First Testament here, of looking for these things that were done by these people in relationship with God, in the duties that they had before God, the ministries that they had before God, and they walked in faith in doing them. They were learning. Remember, David's in the wilderness here. I want to remind you that Abraham did not know God as the personal God, the personal name of Yahweh, like Moses did. There's a progression of God revealing himself to mankind. But we're going to see David act in a way that Abraham acted, in faith. And we're going to see some wives involved and families involved. And then the enemies, how he goes against his enemies, which is a reminder of what God told Moses to do, God told Abraham to do, and I believe will again be carried out in the future. And we will talk about this some as we go. But we shouldn't, again, I want to emphasize this, we shouldn't simply read this book as a historical memoir, okay? We look at it as, it is history, it did happen, literally. Then how was God dealing with these people? How were these people walking before God? Were they in obedience? In their young faith, were they growing stronger? They went through the wilderness, they built their faith and the obedience and all that comes with it. So we take that and try to apply that to our lives.
So David, right, and his men came to Ziklag. On the third day, the Amalekites made a raid against the Negeb, against Ziklag. They had overcome Ziklag and burned it with fire. Now, Ziklag was the town that David had kind of asked for the king of Ashdod to give him and his men. So he and his men have been making that kind of their home from where they've been going out and raiding. So this is where all their families are, right?
Right.
And the Amalekites are not very nice.
Yes. So a couple things here. Ziklag, again, is Palestinian land. Amalekites have been raiding the Jews. And then you have to remember that David was raiding, he told the king of the Palestinians, Gath, I think it was, or one of those, I can't remember the city here, but he told the king that he was raiding against the Israelis, okay, the Jews. He wasn't. He was raiding against the enemies of God and Israel, and one of them was Amalek. So this looks like retribution from the Amalekites against David and on Ziklag. That's what this looks like to me. And I want to remind you. Let's go to a slide I have built, just a short one here. If we can put this in perspective. Let's watch this flow here. Exodus 17:14. Then the Lord said to Moses, write this as a memorial in a book and recite it in the ears of Joshua, that I will utterly blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven. They were God's enemies, and he was going to blot out every single creature, of Amalek. Numbers 24:7, watch now. Water shall flow from his buckets, and his seed, this is talking about the Messiah, shall be many waters. His king shall be higher than Agag, and his kingdom shall be exalted. Agag looks to be here a title of the king of Amalek, all right? And so it's important here that Amalek was a preeminent enemy of Israel. In fact, it's looked at in the Old Testament as the first primary enemy of Israel, okay? And so Agag was supposed to be this big enemy, and it's saying that the king is going to be more prominent than Amalek was at the beginning of Israel's beginnings there.
Here's certainly a picture of Satan. He is a killer, a murderer,
right.
and one who was a sworn enemy of the people of God.
Yeah, and he was out to kill the Israelites on their way to the Promised Land. Okay, then in Esther 3:1, after these things, King Ahasuerus promoted Haman the Agagite. Okay, we all remember Haman. Remember, he was out to kill the Jews, take the Jews out. He was an Agagite, all right, the son of Ahamadatha, and advanced him and set him on the throne above all the officials who were with him. And like you were saying, he acted like Satan. He was deceptive. He was pulling the wool over the king's eyes, trying to kill Esther. And
power behind the throne.
Yeah. Right.
We've got some of that going on today.
Intrigue,
Well, just evil.
Yeah.
Spirit behind the king. We see that today.
And then, of course, we remember several chapters back now, 1 Samuel 15:3. Now go and strike Amalek and devote to destruction all that they have. Do not spare them, but kill them both, man and woman, child and infant, ox and sheep, camel and donkey. So that is what God has always wanted to do. The Israelites always disobeyed. Remember, Saul said, "Hey, the people took the sheep for their own," and Samuel said, "What are these sheep bleeding in my ears?" Those kind of things. So it's Amalek is still around because of the sins and the disobedience of Israel.
So Agagite here, is this assuming he's an actual descendant of Agag, the king?
Yeah.
Almost of the royal line of Amalek?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So that's where we're at. And now, so what we're seeing here is David, and we saw this as he's going and warring against the Amalekites in the last several chapters, that he's obeying God in doing this, and he's actually undercover at Ziklag doing that. And we're going to find that here at the end, that David will defeat the Amalekites. Now, this is a prophetic picture of Messiah doing exactly what God wants him to do at the end of the tribulation. Again, when I believe he rides with the Israelites, he rides with the host of heaven. As we come down on horses, that's what it says, that the Israelites are going to take their land back.
So the Amalekites had taken Ziklag, burned it with fire, had taken captive the women. These would be the wives of the men, their daughters, who were in it, both small and great. They killed no one. That shows God's protection. They killed no one, but carried them off and went their way. So it's very interesting, God's preservation here in all this, because you would assume they go in and slaughter the men at least, and probably any of the older folks, and just take the younger women and children as slaves. But
now tell us what happened to Lot, Abraham and Lot.
How God preserved Lot when they were taken captive, right? And the 4 kings against 5, the 4 kings came down, defeated Sodom, Gomorrah, and their allies, carried Lot and his family off captive, and Abraham pursued them, and God gave him a great victory. And he was able to not just rescue them, but he was able to get back their goods as well.
Right. And the king of Sodom, remember what he offered Abram?
The spoils.
All the spoil, or a bunch of the spoils. And what did Abraham say? No, and remember, the Lord was his shield and very great reward. Okay? So remember that as we go through here, because that typology is playing out here again, and it's going to play out even to the spoil. We'll talk about it again, but that's going to play out I believe in the end of the tribulation time too as well.
So David and his men came to the city and found it burned with fire, their wives and sons and daughters taken captive. And David and the people who were with him raised their voices and wept until they had no more strength to weep. They're going to turn to the Lord, though, here. David's 2 wives have been taken captive, Ahinoam of Jezreel and Abigail, the widow of Nabal of Carmel. So David's greatly distressed, for the people spoke of stoning him, because all the people were bitter in soul, each for his sons and daughters. But David strengthened himself in the Lord his God.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
It is beautiful.
Now, a couple things here. I reminded us that of the 2 wives there. One is from the north, one is from the south. David, it's a picture of uniting Israel. When the Lord comes back, now, let's set this up first. The Lord divorced the northern tribes of Israel. And he did not divorce Judah, the southern tribe. And yet, Judah did more wicked in the eyes of the Lord than her sister, he said, his sister, her sister, according to the word of the Lord now. And yet, he says in the book of Hosea in particular, you can see this typology play out, that the Lord will take her back. And there's 2 of them, isn't there? The north and the south. And that's what I'm suggesting here. This looks north and south to me. Jezreel Valley is in the north, and Carmel was in the southern sections, remember? And so it looks to me like a regathering type of, and the Lord coming back to rescue Israel, regather the north and south. And real quick, I want to also remind you that when Sarah died, Rebecca died, Rachel died, those pictures of them being buried, that's a picture of Israel's redemption. They are going to be raised, and I truly believe that is a part of what's going on here.
So here's a good formula here. Life can make some people bitter in soul. The solution to that is to strengthen yourself in the Lord your God. And people need to do that. They need to strengthen their hearts against the things of this world. This world is a fallen place. There's death that we've been praying for. There's all kinds of just horrors that go on, and sickness and sorrow and grief and hurt. The solution, it seems to be that God strengthens his people. He knows how to bring them through. He doesn't always take those things away.
Right.
But in those hard times, to strengthen yourself in the Lord your God.
Right. Now, you remember Jesus asked the Pharisees, "For which of these do you stone me?" So they wanted to stone Jesus. They wanted to stone David here. But David strengthened himself in the Lord, and I think that's exactly what Jesus is going through as well. This will not be the last time for David. We'll see in 2 Samuel in particular, there's 2 times that they turn against David, and we're going to see that type again.
So David said to Abiathar the priest, the son of Ahimelech, "Bring me the ephod." So Abiathar brought the ephod to David. He was going to inquire of the Lord here. David inquired of the Lord, "Shall I pursue after this band? Shall I overtake them?" He answered him, "Pursue, for you shall surely overtake, and shall surely rescue."
Yeah.
So David set out, and the 600 men who were with him, and they came to the brook Besor, where those who had left behind stayed. But David pursued, he and 400 men. 200 stayed behind, who were too exhausted to cross the brook Besor. They found an Egyptian in the open country, brought him to David. They gave him bread, and he ate. They gave him water to drink. They gave him a piece of cake of figs and 2 clusters of raisins. When he had eaten, his spirit revived, for he had not eaten bread or drunk water for 3 days and 3 nights. David said to him, "To whom do you belong, and where are you from?" He said, "I'm a young man of Egypt, a servant to an Amalekite. My master left me behind because I fell sick 3 days ago. We had made a raid against the Negeb and the Cherethites, and against that which belongs to Judah, and against the Negeb of Caleb, and we burned Ziklag with fire." David said to him, "Will you take me down to this band?" He said, "Swear to me by God that you will not kill me or deliver me into the hands of my master, and I will take you to this band." God's got his people, doesn't he?
Yeah.
Just wherever they need to be.
That's right.
Yeah.
Now, he's incorporating an Egyptian here. It's interesting that when Jesus comes back, there will be a highway between Egypt and Assyria. Yep. And then also the Cherethites, I think I've mentioned them, but the Cherethites and the Perethites were Gentile tribes in the land of Israel that actually sided with Israel. And you'll see that in 1 Chronicles in particular. I think it's chapters 17, 18, 19, somewhere in there. You'll see the Cherethites and the Perethites there, that they actually are loyal to David. And I think, again, that's the light to the Gentiles, if you will. That's the Rahab, the Tamars, the others, those kinds of things. So that's what's happening, I think.
All right, he's going to take him down to this band. Just don't deliver him. So there's just something about God having his people in the right place of when they're needed. And you can see that so many times throughout the Bible, and even in our country. I just think that, when the pilgrims came over here and they're getting settled, what did they happen to find but a Native American who spoke English wandering along the shore? God's just got his people. Yeah. He's got his people where they need to be.
It takes, when you mention that, Pastor Joe, my mind goes to Nebuchadnezzar, who the Lord says is my servant. Cyrus, who wasn't a Jew, he's my servant. He names him his servant. The Assyrian is the rod of God's anger. He's his servant as well. Now, I don't know what you think about President Trump. I don't know what his salvation is like, but I'm sure you've seen the clips of him on the stage, and I'm sure you've seen the generation of those videos that have been shown the last couple of days, where he turns his head just a little bit, and instead of that bullet hitting him in the back, it hits his ear, and he turns it that much. Now, it looks like everything is against him. And we say, well, okay, God, we're asking you, is everything against the United States? Is everything against, where are we going from here? And when something like that happens, you begin to say, okay, Lord, do you have something good for us? Do you have something that will come good of it? Now, I pray that it's for him individually, and that he, he humbles himself before the Lord, cries out to the Lord, and is a changed man in his heart. But we do look for good things because we know God is intricately involved in the things of the nations for sure, but in our lives, especially as believers. So we look for those things, and I think we should.
So this guy takes them down, and he shows them the camp. When he take them down, behold, they were spread abroad all over the land, eating and drinking and dancing, because of all the great spoil they had taken from the land of the Philistines and from the land of Judah. And David struck them down from twilight unto the evening of the next day. Not a man of them escaped, except 400 young men who mounted camels and fled. Oh, those beautiful camels, always there when we need them.
Yeah. Now those Amalekites will show up later. God's not done with them. David's not done with them. But you can see here that David, it's interesting. He didn't take the spoil. He didn't and make comments to God like, well, I kept these people alive, or I let them go. He went and struck them down all day and did exactly what the Lord wanted him to do. So I'm saying when he took the spoil, God gave it to him. But what I am suggesting is that he didn't disobey God like Saul did. So,
when we taught history, there was actually a guy in ancient times who wrote an ode to his camel.
Oh.
Beautiful and swift and strong.
Yeah.
Well, they got 400 young men all the way down here.
Have you ever rode a camel?
No, I have not.
I have once, and I don't.
You don't go for it? You wouldn't have written a poem to your camel?
No,
okay.
No. David recovered all that the Amalekites had taken, and David rescued his 2 wives, like Abraham rescued Lot. Nothing was missing, whether small or great, sons or daughters, spoil or anything that had been taken. David brought back all. David also captured all the flocks and herds, and the people drove the livestock before them and said, "This is David's spoil."
Well, you did pretty good.
Yeah.
Then David came to the 200 men who had been too exhausted to follow David, who had been left at the brook of Besor. They went out to meet David and to meet the people who were with him. And David came near to the people and he greeted them. Then here we got some of these worthless fellows. Then all the wicked and worthless fellows among the men who had gone with David said, "Because they did not go with us, we will not give them any of the spoil that we have recovered, except that each man may lead away his wife and children and depart."
Yeah.
Wicked and worthless fellows, once again, in this story.
This is a thread that kind of runs through the scriptures as well. Remember, Jesus talked about the parable of the workers, and he went out early in the morning, and got some, and then a little bit later, and they all got the same wage. He's basically saying, I'm not leaving anybody behind. He's not a socialist or a communist, all right? He's saying, I'm promising you a wage, go work for it. He's not handing it out to anybody, just handing it out. He's giving it to those who work or do what they can in the Lord. So that's what's happening here.
That is. And this has set up a big principle and is often used in missions to talk about those who give to missions. The Bible talks about, especially in the New Testament, are partners in the gospel that goes out, even though these men stayed behind. I think the King James says they stayed behind with the baggage. I don't know if it mentions it in the ESV here.
I think it comes up.
I think it comes up.
Yeah.
But David said, "You shall not do so, my brothers, with what the Lord has given us. He has preserved us and given into our hand the band that came against us. Who would listen to you in this matter? For as his share is who goes down in the battle, so shall his share be who stays by the baggage. They shall share alike." So David is really showing some wisdom here. And this is for David, to me, kind of like a Solomon moment, where David is showing some real leadership, some real skill in managing his people. And not letting the wicked get the upper hand in these things. Because if he had listened to the wicked and worthless people, he would have had embittered quite a few of his own men.
Yeah. So Ephesians 2 and 3 and the end of, again, Hebrews chapter 11, where it says that the Israelites will not get what they were promised without us. We must fulfill our role before they get theirs. And Ephesians 2 and 3 talks about the wall that's been broken down, that we are one with them. Now, that does not mean we get the land of Israel. That does not mean we do some of the things that they're going to do. We all have our roles that we're going to do. But we all are written down in the Lamb's Book of Life. We all get salvation. We're all in the kingdom. We all get to serve him there and all the things that come with it. We get to feast with him there. You know, the book of Luke talks about him serving us, which is just weird. But he's going to throw a great feast, and we're all going to be there together. So,
and I think it's going to serve David real well in his kingdom, because in 25, and he made it a statute and a rule for Israel from that day forward to this. Now, a lot of folks think, you know, you throw your army out there and they will fight and win the battle, but they have to eat.
yeah.
They have to be able to live while they're out there. They have to have the provisions. They have to have a constant flow of supply coming up for to sustain them in battle. So this really is, I think, helped David in establishing, thinking about ultimately his kingdom and putting together a victorious army.
Yeah, right. And he's not done. Look at verse 26. And when David came to Ziklag, he set part of the spoil to his friends, the elders of Judah, saying, "Here is a present for you from the spoil of the enemies of the Lord." Now remember what's happening in Judah? Where Saul is trying to, compromise David, who David is. That's where David's from. David went up there to try to help them from the Philistines, and Saul came after him to run him out of there. Those kinds of things. But David is reaching back to them no matter what is Judah. There was even some Judaites that were against David there. But he's sending things back to him. And this is a picture of the heart of David, but is a picture of the grace of the Lord too. So,
and the elders will have a prominent part here in the Old Testament as the local leaders of the tribe. And they'll often be come together as a council or rise up, as it will, with Rehoboam against the Lord. But they're the local tribal leaders.
yeah.
And it even mentions them all here. So he sends the part of the spoil to his friends, the elders, saying, "Here's a present from the spoil of the enemies of the Lord." It was for those in Bethel, in Ramoth of the Negev, in Jatir, in Aror, in Sipmoth, in Eshtemoa, in Rakel, in the cities of Jerahmeelites,
Yeah.
in the cities of the Kenites.
Yeah. So where are these places at? What does it matter? They're north and south. He starts in the middle with Bethel, and he goes to the Ramoth of Negev, which is, again, the south. It means south, but it actually means, it's the desert region. Then you go, Aurora is up north. So it's all over.
Yeah.
Yeah. So David, again, is uniting Israel.
And in Hormah, and in Bor Ashan, and in Athak, and in Hebron, for all the places where David and his men had roamed. So he has some political skill here as well.
Right. You want to go?
Proverbs mentions, did you have something?
No, go ahead.
Proverbs mentions the wisdom of when and where to give gifts. Some places not as a bribe, but there is a place for gifts in the Bible.
Yeah. Think of the grace of David here, and again, we say by the grace of God because he was trying to obey the Lord. But think of the grace of David. These people were wanting to stone him, and David and the Judaites and others had turned against him, and he is sending them spoil. I think he's doing it because he loves his nation, he loves his God, he's obeying his Lord, but he's trying to unite them too. So he's doing it out of the grace that the Lord has given him. So it's kind of a neat thing.
Well, it's been a long struggle. David's been running from Saul for quite a while.
Yeah.
And if you think back over this, when he first fled, just him, he went down to Gath to the king Achish there, and realized that he was in a bad place and feigned insanity to get away.
Yeah.
Then God brought out the disenfranchised, if you will, who gathered around David, including Joab.
Yeah.
And from there, kind of David's training, I would suggest, really kind of began. His training not only in fighting, but his training as a administrator, his training as a king. And I think you kind of see that, at least I do, a culmination in that last chapter as he's reaching out then to the elders of Judah. Yeah. And God's brought him to a point now where he's ready to take the mantle.
Yeah. I see a convergence of a type coming here where Saul continues to go down, 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 and fulfills his role as a despicable king and a man of disobedience. And the Lord continues to give him grace to come back up, believe, come back up, but he just continues to go down, down, down. And through all of this, David is learning. He's made some mistakes. I believe he's got cracks in his armor, but he keeps going up, up, up. And David ends this section very, very positively, uniting Israel, or trying to at least, and all this stuff. And that is and it's interesting because we don't jump from the witch of Endor to the death of Saul, which you would think, well, I'm going to write this out. He visits the witch. God says he's done. It says in 2 Samuel, we'll get there, that one of the reasons he died was, disobedience, but because of the witch of Endor, he sought her instead of God. And so you would think, well, Saul dies right after that, right? Well, he sort of does, but not before God interjects David and what David is doing. So now, I don't know if I can't play golf anymore. I'll never play golf again. I wish I could, but the Lord said no more, which is fine. But lately I've been noticing, watching some golf, what they'll do is they'll take some players, a couple players who are really good, and they start showing how one is, he's kind of behind, like, what's wrong with him? He's not getting it together. And they'll show a graph, and he's not really getting it together. And then toward the third day, the beginning of the third day, you start seeing that graph go. And then you have this other one who's doing okay. And then like the second day, you're like this, and maybe a dip down, and then a big dip up, and then the third day, okay, down. And at some point you see a cross, where you see one player go up, the other player go down, and then the match is over. And that's what this reminded me of. That Saul kept, bogeying. He kept hitting too many shots against the Lord, and David kept learning. David kept reuniting. David kept fighting, which remind me of somebody here recently too. Fight, and that's what he does. I again remind you of this concept, where Paul said, "We do not struggle to the point of shedding blood, but we do struggle." That doesn't mean we don't struggle. We don't struggle to that point because Christ shed his blood. We don't need to shed our blood for our salvation. But we do need to work it out. And if we're not working out our salvation, it's not acting in faith. It's not stepping out in faith and working on behalf of the Lord. And there's going to be huge loss of rewards. There's no loss of salvation, but there's a huge loss of rewards. Remember, the Bible says you will suffer loss. You're going to sense it. You're going to know it. So there's just a lot to do in this life after we know Christ, and we need to keep at it. And we can learn from David's life. Keep at it.
We can.
Strengthen himself in the Lord. Right.
So it looks at this point that the Philistines have pretty much driven Saul all the way north. They're fighting on Mount Gilboa, which is in the Jezreel Valley, way north of Jerusalem, north of Shechem, just a little bit southwest of the Sea of Galilee. So,
and we pointed that out last week too, that they were further north than they should have been. They're out of their territory.
Saul has lost a lot of territory, and the Philistines have been pushing him up north. It looks like all through this, all through this campaign here.
When we get to the second book of Samuel, it's not going to be that way. The Lord is going to push them back using David, David's going to whip the Philistines, the Amalekites, all the ites, and there'll be a large list of them. He's not going to be perfect, but he's fighting. Remember what Proverbs says, a righteous man falls 7 times, gets back up. That's not, you don't get to count 7 and then be okay. It's the number that, if you fall, you get back up and keep at it. So, yeah.
He's not going to get back up, though.
Yeah. No, Saul's not going to get back up. No.
So the Philistines have pushed them far, far north, up toward the Sea of Galilee.
Yeah.
The Philistines were fighting against Israel. The men of Israel fled before the Philistines, and there's something wrong with that. Because if God is with you, remember what his promise was? The enemies would flee from you.
Yeah.
But if you are out of his favor, then you're going to flee from your enemies. Remember that about spiritual warfare. That's how Satan works. He overcomes people with fear and depression and gets people down, and then he can really start destroying and working on their faith against their faith.
Yeah, I think there's a future prophecy where 1,000 will flee before 10 or something like that.
Yeah.
So
they're fleeing before the Philistines, so we know there's something wrong there. And they fall slain on Mount Gilboa. Yeah. The Philistines overtook Saul and his sons. The Philistines struck down Jonathan. He is listed as first. I like Jonathan.
Yeah.
He was a man who just loved David. And they had a covenant between them, actually a couple of them. Jonathan had been faithful to God in the battle against the Philistine. I look back and think of his life and how he had brought about victories for Saul by his faithfulness. And here he dies. He dies because of his father's failures.
Yeah. I think we can learn from that too, can't we?
I think we can.
That our sin affects others. There's nothing hidden that will not be revealed. And so when we are sinning, it will affect our family, it will affect our friends, it will affect our church, it will definitely affect our ministry. It will definitely affect our relationship and how we relate to the Lord. It won't affect your salvation if you're saved. But the Lord is not going to let us just kind of continually go on. But he's got a lot of patience. He showed a lot of patience for Saul. Given him a lot of opportunities. But at some point, death comes calling. So
it does.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know what you think. I think Jonathan made a strategic grave error in some of the covenants he made with David, for David not to come against his house, respect all that kind of stuff, because God is going to give David the kingdom, and Jonathan should have been smart enough to know there can't be 2 houses in the same kingdom. You can't divide the kingdom like that. God is going to give David a clean slate here. He's going to bring the kingdom together under David, of course, make a covenant with him. If Jonathan really understood ultimately what God's purpose was, that the kingdom was going to be taken from Saul, given to David, I don't think that covenant would have been a real wise idea.
Well, there is this history of these people in the Old Testament, and even I think today, that when you have an enemy to your death, you go take out them and their sons, because one day they're going to come after you. And in fact, when David dies, he tells Solomon, don't let his head go down into the grave without you having a hand in it, basically. So there's some of this making a covenant, befriending. Remember, don't be unequally yoked. It doesn't mean that we take out our enemies, but it does mean that we're not unequally yoked.
But I was taught a principle here that has stood me well, which is don't make deals with God, because you don't know all ends, and the deal you make with God is not going to be nearly as good as the deal that God has in mind for you. So this idea of submitting yourselves to God, humbling yourselves before him, I would recommend, don't make deals with God. Simply humble yourself before him and trust that he's got the best deal out there for you. We can't see all ends. And I don't think Jonathan really saw how all this was going to work out. So,
I think we'll stop there. I've got some pictures of Mount Gilboa where Saul fell. The pictures are very interesting, the terrain and all that stuff, and we'll touch on those next week, and we'll pick up here next week. So.
and outside of having their names in the Bible, we know almost nothing about, at least I don't, of Abinadab and Malchishua, his other sons. They do get mentioned in the Bible,
Yeah.
but only as those who died because of Saul's
Yeah.
error.
And David, actually, he has one more son that we'll pick up at some other point.
Mephibosheth.
Yeah.
Is that right?
That's Jonathan's.
No, that's
Yeah,
Jonathan.
that's Jonathan.
That's his
Saul has a fourth son that's not named here, and so we'll pick that up. So,
because he's going to try and rally the kingdom and take the,
yeah.
yeah.
Right. Let's pray. Lord, thank you again. We love you so very much. We are very concerned with America, but Lord, this is not surprising you. Nothing catches you by surprise. But what we see happened in the scriptures with Abraham, with David, with Solomon, with all of them, with the women who had faith in the scriptures, Lord, tells us that we have a future ahead of us, and that if we walk circumspectly in you, thinking about what we're doing things for righteousness' sake, not letting things come out of our mouth that wrong or that hurt you, that hurt others. We guard our hearts, we guard our tongues, we guard our minds, we take every thought captive, and we act on the behalf of the God who sent his son on our behalf. We love you. Thank you so much for the opportunity. We worship you for it in Jesus' precious name. Amen.
Amen.